All right, coming to I'm going to say it, LA. Coming to you from am I saying this right? Coming to you from an undisclosed location. I
That's
practiced
it.
this all day too. Coming to you from undisclosed location, two actually from Charleston, South Carolina. Did you know that, Iliam? Coming from Charleston, South Carolina, in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains. Your intrepid host, Ilia Marzulli. Thank you for being here. This is a great honor, and you need no introduction. I mean, there's gonna be like 3 people watching this. You'll be like, who's this guy? But everyone else knows who you are. And I was just explaining to you that I asked you to come on. And I wasn't sure if you would say yes or no. And then you said, yeah, I'll come on. And I'm like, great. What am I supposed to ask you now? Immediately, I went to that SNL sketch from the 90s where Chris Farley is interviewing Paul McCartney. You know, he's like, remember that time you were with the Beatles? And I'm like, I'm going to ask him some question. Like, I'm going to run out of questions in 30 seconds. I'm going to ask, like, you remember that time, the aliens crash landed in Roswell in 47? And you immediately, you gave me my homework assignment. You're like, okay, well, watch this documentary. It happened to be on Roswell. I'm like, yes. So anyways, I've been there it is right there. We're here to talk tonight about revisiting Roswell, your documentaries. And you gave me homework assignments, and I've been binge watching your channel all week, preparing for this, coming up with questions. And I will say this, the elephant in the room, of course, Ellie, you're not the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that within the greater truther camp, I think you know what I mean by truther, camp, right, Ellie? Is that it's divided between whether or not Roswell is legitimate or it's a hoax. And so break this down really quickly. Those who say it's a hoax, they're going to say something like the government faked it, and that it's all leading up to like Project Bluebeam type event. That this whole disclosure, they're slowly leaking out to lead to a great deception. And now both sides are going to say there's going to be a great deception. Now the other side who say this is legitimate will say, well, there's actually aliens working with the government, spiritual entities and dumb tunnels, things like that. And the thing I really appreciated when I was watching your documentary was how you started with from the position of the premise of, well, a lot of people are saying this is a hoax. And let me show you why the evidence of my research points to why this is legitimate. So I guess we'll just break into this, LA. Why did you make the 2 films? And you just showed them. What do they call their the exoneration and the debris field.
Right. Yeah. And then in the debris field. And we made exoneration because, Jesse Marcel, I kind of coined this expression. Jesse Marcel Sr. Is sort of a Lee Harvey Oswald of ufology. I mean, this guy was a patsy. We interviewed his granddaughter. We interviewed his widow, Jesse Marcel Jr.'s widow. And all of them come on the record. And Jesse Marcel Jr.'s, one of his best friends, Dr. Richard O'Connor. And basically, all of them stated on the record that Marcel Sr. was the fall guy. He was a patsy. And what's interesting, let me just get a prop here, because I think you'll find this is important. This is a replica of the newspaper, but this is what it says. Okay, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. That is the truth, and that was July 8th. And let me just read something from this. So you got this guy, Mr. and Mrs. Wilmot. Yeah, there it is, right there. And Wilmot said that this thing came down about 1,500 feet high and going fast, between 400 or 500 miles an hour. His appearance looked like this, like 2 saucers. End to end. There's your flying saucer right there. I want to thank Chauncey Green for making this and sending it to me. A day later, General Ramey comes up and redacts the story and says, excitement's not justified. What's the truth? Tim Alberino says in the film that they had it right the first time. And they did. I believe it. They had it right. And then in the film, we show and bring in all these other witnesses who testify that this was, first of all, it was not delusional. There's a physicality to the Roswell crash. The metal was retrieved. They didn't get all of it, number one. There were 2 crash sites. So as the thing comes in, it hits here and bounces up, and then it finally lands miles away at another site. This is why Jesse Marcel Sr., when he's in the debris field, he never sees the bodies, or the craft. He just sees debris, and he bobbles up at debris and brings it back, and they all look at it. But the other group that went out there, they did see the craft, and they did see more debris, and they saw the bodies. So, you've got you've got a plethora of witnesses that come on the record and state that they saw this thing in Hangar 84. In our second film, in the debris field, we actually get to Hangar 84. We actually got to go in Hangar 84. It's all in the film, which in itself is just amazing. And it hasn't changed at all since 1947.
I'm gonna bring. Of course, I have a lot of questions to ask. I was gonna bring this up real quick. Would you say this is an accurate depiction of the debris field, like where it hit and then it kind of spread out to those two different sites? Would you say that's accurate? I was trying to find a
this shows like two different craft going to two different places.
Okay.
And I'm not sure about that. What I do know is that it is a skip site, and I got that term from Chuck Sikowski, who is in both. Well, he's in the second film in Roswell, and I just want to thank Chuck for helping with that and setting it all up. And if you want to do a deep study in the cattle mutilations, you can check out our film, but you can also go to Chuck's site, ufonut.com, and he's Mr. Cattle Mutilation himself. He's top-notch researcher and has been in the field for decades. So it was Chuck Sikowski who called it a skip site, and that's exactly what I think happened. I think the craft hit, some of it broke up, and then it crashed, and that's where they retrieved. The second site is where they got the disc and the bodies from.
Well, maybe this is a good time. Then I'll just go ahead. I talked to you earlier. I was going to play the White Sands footage. So let me bring this up. And what I'm going to do is it'll play like 3 times in a row. I created kind of longer. Yeah. Maybe you could take us through this and show how maybe this relates to what you think happened at Roswell. So let's see here.
So there's the disc. It comes up. I think it's already hit once, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's going to hit right here.
Yeah. So watch it shatter. Bam.
Okay. Boom. Yeah.
So it's already did the skip, and you can see the shards coming off of it like bullets out of a gun. And the deal is, okay, that's the first skip.
Yeah.
And that's what we think happened at Roswell. I think this was from White Sands, and Chuck Sikowski again, and I've talked about this, and I feel it's legit, and I also feel it was smuggled out. It was smuggled out.
So, and that's the idea. So when it went boom at Roswell, the debris would have then traveled. I think you said in the film maybe 3 or 4 mile radius or something like that. Maybe.
Well, no, not. I mean, where it comes down, like right there, the first site, the skip. Some of it just comes off of it, but we're not saying this is exactly what happened, but it's similar to it.
It's a good example.
Right there is where the craft really disintegrates. Whatever this thing is, it disintegrates. And so these pieces of metal come shooting out like bullets out of a gun. And this is why we didn't get it all, because the metal that we found in the debris field was buried about 6 to 8 inches underneath the soil. And Chuck Sikowski was out there with his metal detector, Frank Kimbler, who was fantastic, because Frank's been out there numerous times. And it was Frank that found 2 pieces of the metal, and they had it tested. And the metal basically is an aluminum alloy from the 7000 series, but it doesn't match anything that we know. And remember, that aluminum, the 7000 series, wasn't invented till I think 1951 or 52. So Roswell was 47. So unless somebody has a time machine, and this gets back into Philip Corso's book, where the idea of back engineering debris from Roswell actually took place. And this picture right here. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
This was taken right after we cleaned it off with some water. That's the metal from the debris field.
Which was the exciting conclusion to this too. Okay, so maybe we could backtrack a little bit and just what do we know? What do we need to know as a backstory to all of this?
A couple of things. First of all, the Roswell incident is extremely interesting because it's 1947. The Cold War has commenced, and the 509th Bombing Group, which is the only nuclear-capable bombing group on the planet at that time, is stationed in Roswell, New Mexico. So, in my opinion, and the late David Flynn also believed this, the crash may have actually been deliberate. And I realize that that's kind of hard to get our heads around. But the late David Flynn believed that the crash was deliberate. In other words, if they're creating some sort of a ruse, some sort of a deception, then you bring in the crash, and the grays are just, these are just avatars, these suits that the grays inhabit. In other words, when you look at a gray alien, it's basically this, there's no digestive system. It's like an avatar. And I got there by reading Whitley Strieber's book, and others have said the same thing, that the gray aliens that are now part of our culture, they seem to be a biological construct for something to inhabit. In my wheelhouse, what's inhabiting them are the demons. Demons, when you say that word, people immediately get, exorcists and all this kind of stuff. But demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, which were destroyed in the flood. The book of Enoch tells us that that's what they are. They're earthbound and they roam the earth. So the dragon, Satan, knows this, and he creates these avatars because in order for a demon to manifest, it has to inhabit a person or an object or an animal, right? And then it can manifest here. So the dragon goes, all I'll do is create this biological avatar, biological suit, and the demon can go into that, manipulate it, which is why they're very robotic. They don't say anything. They all look pretty much alike. Yeah. And other abductees or some abductees that I've talked to, that you can stack them up like chairs. You open a drawer and there are the bodies. So what are we looking at here? And that's where I believe that they are avatars. And the late David Flynn also believed that.
I actually really appreciated that explanation because I was thinking about this today. I'm like, I was thinking through what I was going to ask in this interview, and I was like, well, okay, if we're talking about technology, there's a technological boom after this. How ironic is it if it's a total accident that, like, this crash happens on total accident, and then, but it makes a lot more sense if there's an actual, I guess, a planned crash, kind of, make it look like an accident. I get that. That's really interesting. Okay. So we looked at I'm just going to pull this back up here. We looked at the newspaper clip. You already showed that. Let me scroll back. Bring this up. Okay. And so we saw what the newspaper said, but then this version was immediately redacted by General Ramey. Mm-hmm. And let me see if I can bring up his picture here. Now, of course, this is, you show this picture all throughout the documentary. It's the famous shot of Major Jesse Marcel when he's brought out into the room and the press is there, the cameras are flashing. And this is the Patsy shot, as yes,
it is.
Patsy shot.
Not very long, right?
Yeah. So why? Okay. So I guess again, maybe you already covered it in here, but why? Why was this redacted? Why did Ramsey come in when he did? The military puts it out. Ramsey comes in. I think he flies in from Texas, right?
Yeah. I mean, He basically flew in. So who's commanding Ramey to go in and put the kibosh on this and handle the story and completely redact what was printed on July 8th? And then we have a deathbed confession by Mr. Hott, who basically says that, he was there in a room with Ramey and Marcel and other people. They passed around the wreckage. They were all looking at it. They'd never seen anything like it. So they put the kibosh on it. The higher ups put the kibosh on it. I think that in their minds, remember, this is 47. So you go back a little bit and you get the Orson Welles show on the radio, War of the Worlds and all that. Even though it was a fictional account, people were panicked. So they don't want to panic the American people. So they lie, essentially. And the cover-up begins, and this continues until 2017, where Commander David Fravor on Tucker Carlson show states on the record that he saw a tic-tac shaped object, similar to the one that we just showed, that comes down like this. And this thing shot away from him like a bullet out of a gun. And when asked, well, what do you think this was? He looks right at the camera and says, whatever this was not from this earth, not of this earth. So that that's full circle. I mean, that's a 180-degree turn, from where the official story was in 1947. And remember, from 47 until 2017, if you talked about this stuff, you were a conspiracy theorist. That's Ramey's the guy with the telegram in his hand. And what's interesting, David Rudiak, through the use of a computer, was able to zoom in on that telegram, and there it is, and read it. And you can see disc, bodies, Wright-Pat. I mean, why are they shipping a weather balloon to Wright-Patterson Field? Start there. They wouldn't be, even if it's a top secret mogul, they don't need to ship that to Wright-Pat. And then you have disc and bodies. Weather balloons don't have bodies. So, and then of course I was at this ridiculous presentation at Pepperdine University years ago. And I had some guy up there telling all the students that it was the Project Mogul. So I raised my hand and said, well, what about the so-called crash test dummies? Because crash test dummies weren't used by the military until 51 or 52. So unless once again, we've got some sort of a time machine, there are no crash test dummies. And the guy had no answer. I mean, I caught him, barefoot, and he just tap danced around that and gave some cock and bull answer. And I just got up and left the room, realizing, well, this guy's a shill for the party line, as it were. And that party line remained intact and in place until 2017. And now Congress is talking about all this, which
it seemed like the switch happened. I started noticing the switch, I think, with the Obama administration, because I remember Clinton going on, I think it was like a late night talk show, and he was asked the alien question. And I think his answer was something like, he knows nothing about it and he's going to get to the bottom of it. He never came out. And then I think Obama kind of nonchalantly kind of just said, yeah, we know that they exist out there and we don't know what they are. So it seemed like, okay. So I just want to point out here that, and Ellie knows that this is obviously where the hoax really takes off, right? Because people look at this and go, clearly that's not a UFO, it's a weather balloon. And Jesse Marcel, he was mistaken. He thought it was a UFO, but it was a weather balloon. Now this guy is, maybe you can go over that, Ellie, why he would not mistake. I mean, so the idea here is that he's drug out into this room. He's thinking he's coming out to reveal the flying saucer that he found. And then he comes out and there's a weather balloon sitting there. And of course, he's an intel guy, right? So he's got to obey his orders. He's outranked by a general sitting in the same room. I'll go back to this picture right here. So he's like right across over here. And you could see his face looking at him like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on here?
Basically, it's like he's looking at Gemma Ramey going, are you kidding me? That look says it all. And when we interviewed Dennis Balthasar in Roswell, who's an incredible ufologist, has been studying the Roswell crash for decades and talking about it, and he said the same thing. I mean, it was a setup. He was a patsy. He was a fall guy. They did this, and Jesse Marcel Sr. was the 509th Bombing Group intelligence officer. This is an Elmer Fudd. This is a really smart guy who knows everything that's out there. He's been trained in it. He knows what the Russians have, what the Chi-Coms have. He knows it all. He has to, because that's his job. To think that he would mistake a weather balloon for anything else is patently absurd. And when he goes back and he gives it, he collects, he goes out to the site, and we've been to the sites in the middle of nowhere, and he gathers up the evidence and he goes back and he stops off at his house and he wakes up his wife and his son, and he has everything displayed in the kitchen, brings them out and goes, take a good look at this. You may never see anything like this again. It's from another world. And this is where Jesse Marcel Jr. comes in. Now, when I was interviewing Jesse Marcel Jr., his father, Marcel Sr., had already passed away. So, and then a few years later, Jesse Marcel Jr. passed away. But I have him on a written interview that I did with him. I sent him the questions. He sent the answers back, and we dramatized that. That's Marcel Jr. right there. He was a flight surgeon, brilliant guy, amateur astronomer, medical doctor. I mean, the guy was just an amazing human being. Really just an amazing human being. And so he answered the questions, and he was like an 11-year-old boy at the time. And, to think that his father would mistake a weather balloon for something and then wake up his wife and his son and go, hey, this is from another world. I mean, it's just like Lee Harvey Oswald and a lone gunman thing. And I realize some people still believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did it. Total nonsense. The head, unlike what Dan Rather going, and the head goes forward. When the American people finally get to see the Zapruder film, the head goes back and to the left, back and to the left. The kill shot, one of the kill shots, comes from the grassy knoll. The other one probably comes from the overpass, because that one goes through the windshield and enters here, where they did the tracheotomy. I mean, they basically, there's 3 shots that hit him all within a half a second. This is a well-coordinated assassination done by, we won't even go there. But the bottom line is to think that Marcel Sr. would mistake wreckage, and we bring in other witnesses that held that, their relatives held the wreckage. They were there. They saw the bodies. They looked at all this. And that's the thing. You get too many, like Walter G. Hall, his deathbed confession. So that was not opened until after his death. And it's an affidavit. And he basically states in legal terms what he saw. He went into Hangar 84. That's where the disc was kept. That's where the bodies were kept. That's why when we got into Hangar 84, for me, it was like, you got to be kidding me. Because I've known about this since I was a kid, when they, not the History Channel, but those shows way back when would talk about Roswell and stuff, and the stuff of conspiracy theorists.
Well, let me jump into Hangar 84 here. Before we move on, I just want to point out to everyone that a lot of people who know me, I've kind of jumped all over the place with Roswell, trying to figure this out myself. LA, I'm one of them. Is it a hoax? Did it happen? But I have to say that this right here, this letter, is one of the more convincing pieces for me, because clearly in 1947, they were not expecting, when was it deciphered? 50 years later? I don't know how long later.
It's a long time. And David Rudiak is the gentleman that did it. And that when he finally, was able to do it, it just blew everybody away.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like let's have you hold this letter that none of the press is going to be read, and it just So that was one of the things I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. All right, so let's go into the hangar now. This, I don't know what year this is, but I think this is the hangar, right? This is Hangar 84. I think that's another shot of Hangar 84 there. That's just the runway.
Yeah, go back. That's the inside.
You want me to go back to
go forward. Right, no, back one. Right. Okay. That's from our film right there. That's right now. That's what we saw, except that the doors were closed, and now there's a chain link fence, so you just can't walk up to it. But in 47, that's what you could do. So go to the inside of the hangar. I believe that's from the film, because that looks like the plane that we saw.
Is this? Yeah, it looked kind of similar. I pulled this off of Google, so somebody may have. I got my screaming daughter right outside. I'm sorry if you hear that. Life of a parent. I have a beautiful 2-year-old daughter who's screaming because she's supposed to be in bed right now, and she's outside my door. Okay, this might be from your film. I pulled this off Google today, so I'm not really sure. But there's also this other shot here, and I think there's like wind snap or whatever. I think this is the back room where the
it is.
It's debated whether it was an autopsy there or just the aliens were put there for a time on display, but this is the room you got to go back in. So, I mean, what was that like for you to go into the hangar, but in that back room?
Well, we actually show that in the film. And once again, I mean, somebody probably has this picture. I don't know whether it's our film or not, but people steal your stuff all the time. That's just how the game is played. And
well, Windsnap stole it, I guess.
Yeah, well, there you go. So we went back, and I want to thank Bull for getting us back there. And we got back into the back room, and whether or not, I don't think Dennis Balthazar comes on the record and says he didn't think the autopsy happened there. He think it happened on the base. We really don't know. It's a very small room, but again, the bodies are only 4 to 5 feet tall. In the film, we actually show where the hospital was years in 1947. And it's a clear field. There's just tumbleweeds and dirt. It's no longer there. But Hangar 84 there's a possibility. Walter G. Haught in his affidavit stated that the bodies were under a tarp. So the autopsy could have happened. They could have moved the bodies to get them ready to load on the plane. There's too many witnesses with deathbed confessions, and in my opinion, Roswell happened. It was not a weather balloon. And then we showed Jim and Carolyn Rankin, who were end-of-life caretakers for Colonel Hill. Colonel Hill was a World War II interrogator, and he was end of life, and Jim and Carolyn Rankin were taking care of his affairs. That's how I met Jim and Carolyn. And I interviewed them, and Carolyn asked him, what about Roswell? Was it a weather balloon? And on the record, Carolyn states that Colonel Hill hung his head like this and picked it up and said, it wasn't a weather balloon. And then it goes on from there, and Carolyn spills the beans. They had 6 fingers. They were wearing a one-piece suit. Colonel Hill was flown into Roswell to try to communicate with this thing because he was a communications, a debriefer. He was OSS, the forerunner of the CIA and all this. And he could not make communication with it. And one of them was already deceased. This one was alive. There's just way too many witnesses. And that's why the film exoneration is so important, because we've done our homework. And for those out there, a lot of people out there and say that all this is, well, not a lot, but there's some. I'm trying to get this centered. It's all demonic delusion. Nothing could be further from the truth. Yes, there's an aspect of it which can be delusional. I understand that, but there's a physicality to it. And that's why when we're out in the debris field and you see that piece of metal there, we discovered it. We had the metal tested. Frank Kimball and Chuck Sikowski. There were 2 pieces. Chuck took one and got it tested. Frank Kimball took the other one and got it tested. And again, it's an aluminum alloy 7000 series, which wasn't invented till years later. And it's not an exact match. So, what are we really looking at here? And in my opinion, it's the tip of the iceberg, the beginning of decades of deliberate obfuscation by the powers that be.
Now, I want to talk really, before I talk about Linda Marcel, who is Dr. Jesse Marcel's Jr.'s widow, and then his daughter was
Denise.
Denise, yeah, which is, let me just pull up her, I think this is her picture there, right? That's Denise right there,
yep,
kissing her dad. So I wanted to play this footage, and this actually comes, I asked your permission to play this because I was trying to find this clip. You played it in your documentary. I couldn't find it anywhere, and maybe you can comment on this. This is the right here. This would be it's going to play a few times, and maybe you can comment on what's happening here.
Yeah, this is the Roswell film. My business partner Gil Zimmerman and I, we co-direct and do all these films together, co-direct and co-produce. Gil worked 30 years at DreamWorks and Disney, so he's just a great partner in all this. So we looked at this, and I said, Gil, what do you think? And he goes, well, if it's a hoax, they spent a lot of money on a hoax, and for what reason? No one's going to the bank with this. The reason why you got everybody in uniform, you got at least 15 or 20 people, and what we're looking at here is, you can see the body. Show it again. Okay, so they're bringing it in on a stretcher, and nobody cares about the camera guy. Everybody wants to see this thing because it's an alien, and it's a gray right there. It's a gray on film, and this is why I believe it's the real deal. I believe it was smuggled out. See, there's whistleblowers, people like Walter G. Haught. They can't live with it. They can't live with the fact that all this has been covered up. People like Commander David Fravor, they can't live with the fact that it's been covered up, and on it goes. And so, whistleblowers like David Grush comes in Congress and states on the record in Congress that we have biologics that were retrieved from these crashed UAPs, which are non-human biologics. That's an earth-shattering statement. He's a whistleblower. Immediately, the powers that be go in and try to discredit him, 8 ways to Sunday, but he survives all that. And I believe he's telling the truth, as he was on Tucker Carlson show, and Carlson did a full 45-minute interview with him. He's a real smart guy, and he knows what he's doing. So once again, you've got all throughout from 1947 to modernity, you've got whistleblowers, people coming forward, talking about what happened in Roswell and that it was real.
And now I've seen the pictures of the mannequins, and you said like 1952, I think, right there. And
Yeah,
this doesn't look like the mannequin pictures to me.
at all.
And now, is he wearing like a skin tight, like skin
Yeah,
colored
it's
suit?
exactly like it's a one-piece jumpsuit in Colonel Hill. See, this is what's interesting. So you've got that dynamic there, but you've got Colonel Hill's testimony saying that they wore like a one-piece jumpsuit. So I mean, there it is. Do these people know Colonel Hill? No, they didn't. We broke the story on Colonel Hill in our very first film in the 10-part UFO series that you can now watch by going to streaming.lamarzulli.net. Shameless plug. But it's there. We broke the story with Colonel Hill because Colonel Hill never went public with it. It was only after he died, Jim and Carolyn Rankin got a hold of me. I flew down and got it secondhand. But Jim and Carolyn, they're pastors. They're born again, spirit-filled Christians. They're not lying. They're telling us the truth absolutely all day long.
Now, I I try to pause this on the best frame possible, and it would be interesting. I don't know if someone has done like a deep dive digital analysis of this, if they can maybe enhance and see if there's like six fingers there. It's interesting because the head doesn't look as big right there as I would imagine it. I would have imagined the head a little bit bigger. It looks a little bit smaller, but I don't know, it's interesting. So, all right, so let's talk about. Let me see if I can pull back up. There she is, Denise Marcel, and also, okay, so I'll point this out really quickly if I can hold this up. This is the Roswell incident, and to any Roswell researcher, this is like old stuff now. And when I was researching Roswell, one of the things I like to do is I like to look at especially something that's like over 75 years old now. I like to look at the different stages of the research, right? So this came out in the 70s when it seemed like there was like a really taking off in the 70s. It seemed like that, like people were really getting into Roswell. And I guess I totally missed out on the whole thing where Linda Marcel would talk about that she was being harassed, because I think that happened in the 90s. So it was like, bummer, I missed out on it in the book. It didn't happen in the book. But so that was a little surprise for me in your video. So tell me about that. What was going on with that?
Well, again, this is before disclosure, which happened in 2017. So, Jesse Marcel Jr., there he is in the picture, would be traveling and speaking at conferences or whatever. And all of a sudden the phone would ring and Linda would pick it up and there'd be nobody there. And this happened numerous times. They were being harassed. And so Jesse Marcel Jr. was invited to the White House. And he goes back, and we actually have the handwritten telephone number from Congressman D'Amato in the film. Linda Marcel has kept that all these years. And we show that in the film. It's Congressman D'Amato, private number, basically saying to Jesse Marcel Jr., if you get harassed at all, you call me. So, there was pushback, and, eventually they've got to come out, and it's going to happen. I mean, that little film that you just showed where everybody's running around and the body is laid on the ground and people are going up to it. I think that's real. I really do. I think White Sands is real. I know the Tic Tac object that Commander David Fravor saw, as well as other craft. It's all real. Then, of course, we have our film that we did. We broke a story in Watchers, the late Dr. Roger Lear, the Kumbergaz UFO footage, which in my opinion is the best UFO footage ever taken. And I'm going to show you why so. So this is Kumbergaz, taken by Dr. Roger Lear. Right there. And he let us, we broke the story. In our film, in our Watchers series, we broke the story. I used it again in our UFO show, our 10 films. I use this. It's the best footage I've ever seen, because it's not just a disc, like Commander David Fravor, only a few seconds or this or that, the other thing. It's a whole different deal. It's hours of footage, and you can see beings in the craft. And that's why, I love these people that get on and try to say it's a hoax and it's all this stuff. There's a clip I show in the film where Dr. Roger Lear and the cameraman, they're out on Lake Kumbergaz, and you see the moon. And way over here, you see the moon up in the sky. And below the moon is another point of light, let's say over here. So you got the moon here, and this point of light here. All of a sudden, the cameraman zooms in past the moon and zooms in on the craft. There it is. So that's not photoshopped. And this is decades before, AI or anything like that. We broke the story. So, of course, the naysayers are always going to try to debunk everything and say it didn't happen. I interviewed Roger. Roger appeared, the late Roger Lear, Dr. Roger Lear appeared in all of our Watchers series, all of our films. We had an ongoing relationship with him.
Yeah, LA, I can totally appreciate that. And anybody in your field or any field of research, right, that is counter, if you want to call it pseudoscience or whatever, right? I mean, you're going to have all these people coming at you, trying to debunk your research. I totally understand that. I put this up here real quick. This is kind of an off question I wasn't planning, but this is interesting because I think about this a lot. Somebody pointed out in the comments, the day the Earth stood still had a giant gray. It was a robot. It was like it kind of looked like that alien in that footage. It was a little eerie. And this has been long pointed out that what is your thought on in the 50s? Now, all of a sudden, we have all these saucer stories, comic books, pulp fiction, pulp stories. The Day the Earth Stood Still is like a textbook storyline for the coming alien deception almost. It's like they were laying it out there, UN, all this kind of stuff. Do you have well, we're going to cover this a little bit at the end of the interview, so maybe I'm jumping ahead of it, but curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I do. I would call it predictive programming.
Yeah.
And this is why people have seen Star Trek and Star Wars and numerous sci-fi films on the whole UFO phenomenon. So when Congress begins to talk about it, and you get David Grush going, yeah, we have retrieved non-human biologics from crashed UAPs. Nobody does anything. My phone doesn't ring because everybody's been programmed for decades now to believe that it's all real. So, when the real thing comes, nobody blinks. It's unbelievable, really. It's a case study in some ways of predictive programming. Have you ever gone to a movie theater and, got bored with the movie and looked around? This is what the audience looks like.
Well, hopefully our audience doesn't look like that right now.
But they're catatonic when you're looking at a movie. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so they're just being programmed. And over the decades and decades and decades, well, yeah, so what? What's for dinner? And that's where we are. The ambivalence is mind-boggling.
So, okay, and I'm just trying to pick your brain right here because I go back and forth on the idea of like how the ancient writers, they would always call on the muses first to inspire them, like possess them with the muses, and then the muses would help them write the story. So I go back and forth on this. Is the uptick of the Day the Earth Stood Still type of storytelling, we get into Star Trek, we go into Star Wars, all that stuff, is that the muses coming in and possessing the bard because this is the paradigm shift now? Or is there a concentrated government kind of like, we're going to start working through Hollywood now to create these scripts because we have this moment, it happened, this alien crashed, we decided to keep it from everybody, but now we're going to leak it out into fiction. Like, what are your thoughts? Which way do you turn on that?
It's both and. It's not either or, it's both and.
Yeah.
So portions of the government go in and go, we want this made. Here's the budget, make it happen. Steven Spielberg, in my opinion, was given, in his film series Taken, that film series is right down the line. I mean, if you want to know what's really going on, watch his film series Taken, because it's incredible. It starts with the Foo Fighters at the end of World War II, and then it's generational. They're mixing the seed, which is Genesis 3:15, which is Daniel 2:43. The only people, there's a few of us out here that talk about all this from a biblical perspective. Most people have no idea that the Bible addresses the whole UFO phenomenon. I mean, it does. But in order to do that, a person has to come to grips with Genesis 3:15 and understand that there's a seed war going on. There's a breeding program that's going on. We published a book by Karen Wilkinson, Stolen Seed, Evil Harvest. This is published by our publishing company.
I'm bringing her on in a couple weeks.
Yeah, she's amazing. And so it's like trying to, how does this work so I can still be seen? But the bottom line is, it's just a great book. And she talks about being impregnated, and she's not the only one I've ever talked to. They take you, Sperm is taken from the men, ovum is taken from the women. Sometimes the women are impregnated. In the 3rd month of pregnancy, you are reabducted. They take the baby or the entity, the hybrid being, from the womb. And that baby, that hybrid entity, needs to go someplace so it can finish growing, because it can't live outside the womb. That's what the cattle mutilations are about. Bovine blood can be used in human transfusions. Genetic material from the cows are used, in my opinion, to construct an artificial womb. That's where these things go. So it's a very complex phenomenon. And what's interesting is the whole thing kicks off right around the time when Israel goes back into the homeland.
Yeah.
Well, it hinges around the nation of Israel because we are in the last days.
You sold me on Karen Wilkinson's book in one of your videos when you said, I think you said it's not for the faint of heart or something like that. I'm like, that sounds like my kind of read. I went out and bought it right away. It hasn't arrived yet, but I am interviewing her in a couple weeks, so I'm hoping to have that book read. Hopefully it won't give me nightmares or keep me up or anything like that, but I'm hoping to have that read by time she comes in. Okay, so, and I appreciate all the time you give me, and you just let me know when it's like, time for you to clock out.
You got about 15 minutes left.
15 minutes. All right. Well, let's skip that then with the Marcells. Let's see. You talked about David Grush. What do you think the end game is?
Well, the end game is deception. The end game ties into the neo-Darwinists who believe in panspermia, who believe that we were seeded here by an advanced race of extraterrestrials. Now that's what's been, that's what they're running up the flagpole, because they realize that Darwinian theory doesn't work. In other words, you've got nothing, and all of a sudden you've got this very complex genetic code, the DNA, the spiral of life. I mean, where did that come from? So they realize they turn away from the God of the Bible. They poo-poo it. So they don't look at Scripture like we do. In the beginning was the Word, Jesus, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God from the beginning. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. I mean, that's Jesus. And here's proof of the resurrection right here. There's the face from the Shroud of Turin. No one's ever been able to duplicate it or prove it as a fake, including the testing that was done with the carbon dating. That was completely skewed, and we covered that in one of our Watchers films, how it was supposed to be 3 different samples. It came from one sample on the shroud. It came way down here in the corner. So they didn't even uphold the protocols that they had set in place, because the guys in the suits came in and go, no. And then $1 million donation was given to a major university by an unknown person for proving that the shroud was a medieval fake. It's not medieval fake. It's not at all. It's God's calling card. It's the real deal. And to this day, they have no idea how the image was actually formed on the shroud. But I digress. So the Darwinists don't want anything to do with the supernatural. They realize the fallacy of Darwinism. So the neo-Darwinists are going, well, we were seeded here. All life was created by the so-called extraterrestrial. And that is the coming great deception. Because when they do show up, and they will show up, we talked about this in our last 2 films, What is the Truth? This is the last 2 films in our 10-part UFO series, What is the Truth? And we believe that when they come, and I think this is conjecture, but I think it'll happen on the heels of a nuclear event, because the calling card of darkness is one of fear. It's always fear-based. And if you have a nuke going off anywhere on the planet, that creates the greatest climate of fear that humanity has ever experienced collectively. So this is where we are. And all the saber rattling with nukes, Kim Jong-un, Rocket Man and Putin got together a couple of days ago. What are we looking at? A nuke is going to go off, and that's when mile-wide crafts show up.
Order out of chaos.
Yeah, there it is. Right?
And I'm assuming they're going to probably tie it in with the Anunnaki, right? I mean, is that your thought?
That's what the New Agers and the ancient alien crowd, they always go back to the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
But all the Anunnaki are fallen angels. That's all they are. That's all it is. It's the same thing that we read about in the Book of Enoch. It's funny they make this big deal about the Anunnaki guys. They're depicted with wings. Hello, what are we looking at? But see, the problem is, I was on a show yesterday with a guy who's probably a new ager, doesn't believe in the Bible, but has no idea what's written there. Didn't know anything about Genesis 3:15 and the seed war, nor the Book of Enoch, nor why the flood, why all this other stuff going on. It has no idea about Daniel 2:43. Their seed will mingle with the seed of men, but there's no marriage contract, which is where we are right now in our time period in modernity. He knew nothing about any of this. And that's the problem. People think they know, but they don't know because they've never plumbed the depths of that book, the guidebook of the supernatural, i.e. the Bible. Everything is there, but it takes the Spirit of a living God to reveal some of that to a person, even if you're born again and Spirit filled. And the churches, many of the pastors are brought up not knowing anything about Genesis 3:15. They're taught the Sethite theory, which completely stands the rest of the Bible on its head. And you can't get there from there. If you believe in the Sethite theory, good luck.
In Genesis 6, right? The Son of God. Yeah.
Right.
And well, I'll just say too that the one thing I love about the Book of Enoch in the case of the Watchers is that we have this incursion story told all over the world. I mean, it's all these different cultures talk about it, and of course the Sumerian version, of course, is the Anunnaki, and the Bible, of course, or in the case of Enoch, it's the one book that flips it on its head and exposes them as actually wicked, evil ones who came down to nobody else does that. They seem as these enlightened individuals. So I really appreciate that a lot. Let's see what's covering ending up here. You talk in the documentary about the formaldehyde and how there was they smell like that a lot. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, nobody that I'm aware of. I mean, Chase Klotsky had a very close encounter with a gray. Karen Wilkinson aboard the ships encountered them all the time. There is a repulsive odor to them. There's no doubt about that. Now, I've never smelled it. I don't want to smell it. I don't want to have any type of dealings with these guys at all. But all the people that I've interviewed over the decades of research talk about a very strong smell of sulfur a lot of time. The formaldehyde was told to me by a witness that came forward and remained anonymous years ago that had worked at the time at Wright Pat. And she said there was a area at Wright Patterson which is always guarded. And when you got near it, the smell of formaldehyde permeated the air. The bodies were shipped to Wright Pat, in my opinion. And we've got the telegram that Jim Ramey's holding in his hands. Bodies flown to Wright Pat. Well, why would you fly crash test dummies to Wright Pat? What are they going to do with them? I mean, the whole narrative just collapses of its own weight when you watch our film Exoneration, because we bring in all these other witnesses that are corroborating the story.
And you did a great job at it, LA.
Thank you.
Before you leave, there was the great. I got really excited watching when you went out to the field, and you already said it, so I'm not giving anything away. I wasn't sure if I could say this or not, but you went out there and you were with two gentlemen, and I wasn't familiar with them, but they were Roswell experts. They'd been out there a lot, and on the spot on camera, you actually pulled up pieces of metal, which was really awesome. And as of course, as they pointed out, that it would be I guess not near impossible. It would be impossible to remove all. We showed the white sands, how when it hits, it just blows out everywhere, right? And there would be hundreds of thousands of pieces or something like that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Frank Himmler talks about this in the film, and I want to tip my hat to Chuck Sikowski. Chuck was a co-producer in the film. He was the one that got the interviews for that, and Frank Himmler had been out to the debris field numerous times, and both Frank and Chuck said that the powers that be came out and seeded the debris field with metal nails, metal spikes that they pounded into the ground. So people with metal detectors going out there would have a false signal. But Frank knew that, and so he was outside the portion of the field that had been, hammered in with the metal spikes, and that's where we uncovered 2 pieces of metal. On the other hand, we had a false reading, and this is one of the metal spikes right here.
So that you pulled that out of the debris, out of the field.
This came out of a debris field, and it was
so,
buried deep, probably
so,
about 4 inches underneath the ground.
Which is more evidence to the fact that the military was there. And you talk about too in the film about there was at least a couple buttons that were pulled up, military buttons.
Frank Kimbler again, and to me the buttons were a smoking gun. What are aluminum buttons doing in the debris field? If there's nothing to see, if it's a weather balloon, why are we finding buttons from Army fatigues that were issued between 40 and 50, 1940, 1950? What are they doing? I think Frank has found 3 of them. And, basically, just like we did in Boy Scouts, you're shoulder to shoulder on your hands and knees. You're picking up everything, putting it in little paper bags, and then collecting all the debris. But we know about this because of the White Sands footage. When this thing exploded, they didn't get it all. They didn't get it all. And that's why 76 years later, we're in the debris field on film, and we show what happened. We show the pieces of the metal. Thank you, Frank Kimbler. Thank you, Chuck Sikowski.
Well,
and, there we go.
And I want to keep to your time and respect that. So I have one more thing I want to get at before you leave. And you just mentioned Frank Kimbler, and you interview him in the film, and the idea. Okay, and this is one of the questions I had, and you answered a lot of my questions, by the way, in this documentary. A lot of my skepticism, and one of them was this. No, you really did, Ella. You did. You great, because I had a lot of questions, and one of those was originally the reports by Dr. Jesse Marcel and his son, a junior, is that when it was a kind of like aluminum foil that you could like kind of crinkle it all up, and then you would put it down and it would unroll. I think one woman described it as like liquid water on a table.
Spreading out like water, yeah.
And then I'm looking at these shrapnel of metal that's being pulled out there. I'm like, well, why can't you do that with that? So maybe you could just cover that really quickly with what Frank Kimbler talked about in your documentary.
A couple of things. When we were out in the field, and this is all on film, we had fresh batteries in the cameras, just like that. They're drained. Yeah. And I've seen this before, and I talk about that in the film. Something's going on. There's high strangeness. So is it possible that the metal that Frank uncovered, and we have it on film, is it possible that the metal has lost its source of energy? And that's why, when Frank had it tested, and it's in the film, evidence from a debris field, there's a piece of the metal. So when you look at that piece of metal, the metallurgist who they took it to said whatever this is had undergone some sort of trauma, because the metal is like, it's undergone a lot of stress. That's what the metallurgist said. And, the metallurgist has no Roswell dog in the hunt, as it were. So, it's piece by piece. The fact that we found something, 76 years after the fact is mind-boggling. And I mean, when it was you can see my expression in the film. I mean, I'm like a kid in a candy store. I can't even believe that we found a piece of the metal. We did. We found 2 pieces. And once again, Frank Kimbler did a stellar job. He has spent a lot of hours out in the debris field. And Chuck Sikowski also has spent a lot of time out there. So, those 2 guys, and I defer to them in the film because, they've been there. This is my first time in the debris field.
It was the rule of 2, right? If you find one, you're likely to find the other, or whatever.
There you go.
Anyways, I'm going to respect your time, and I really appreciate you coming by, LA. It means the world to me. This whole time, I didn't adjust my camera right. You're taller than me in this, and I'm feeling, kind of like, and then you've got a nice like suit on, and I'm just wearing wool. So it's as if it wasn't already intimidating talking to you as it was. But this has been great. So thank you again. And so everybody go check out LA's website. Do you want to give the address to your website real quick?
It's lamarzulli.com. You can rent all 10 of I only got 3 here, but you can rent all 10 of these for $4.99 a piece. For less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. Folks, it's time to do your homework. I can't admonish you enough. We spent a lot of time and a lot of bucks to make these films. We're the only Christian ministry. There are 10, count them, 10 films in the series. I want to thank my business partner, Gil Zimmerman, doing such a great job. We are business partners, and we have more films which we're in the process of getting out. But lamarzulli.com, or if you want to stream them, $4.99 a piece. What are you waiting for? Streaming.lamarzulli.net, streaming.lamarzulli.net. You can download and watch the films.
All right. Well, that'll be it. Good night, everybody. Thank you for coming by, and thank you, LA.
Thank you. God bless.